economy continuing to shrink while the cost of living continues to rise. Let's not discuss things like school fees and rising fuel costs. It's forced some people to undergo debt rescue counselling. But is it as bad as it sounds? And is there a catch? Well, let's find out. I'm joined by Annaline from Debt Rescue. Spoken to Debt Rescue a couple of times. Annaline, all the best to you for the year. It sounds like a scary term, but I don't imagine it actually is. So why is there this fear factor when it comes to debt rescue?
Well, good morning, Gareth, and thank you so much for having me. I think for many people, the only time they ever really encounter something like debt counseling is when they realize that they're in a position where they're going to need it. And the fact that so few people actually still know what the process is and exactly what it does is, needless to say, something that is unknown does scare a person. But the process has been around since 2007. It's part of the National Credit Act, which means it's legislation. It means that there's a lot of rules and regulations according to how this works. And it's a fantastic method, because it's part of law, to assist consumers who are over indebted. I think what makes it so amazing is the fact that we have legislation that assists consumers who are struggling financially.
Because one of the big misconceptions as well, when I was looking into something like debt rescue as well, is that there's this theory and this belief that any form of debt rescue, any kind of debt intervention is essentially that you're going to take away people's money completely. They no longer have any say over what happens over their finances. It's completely out of their hands. And I think that could be part of the fear factor.
It's very possible. And I think if you would mind if I just quickly explain that. So the whole point of debt counselling is the debt counsellor assists with your debt. In other words, the credit agreements you have. So this would be your home loan, your vehicle, credit card, personal and store cards, that kind of stuff. But to do that, we have to first set up a budget for you. And that budget looks at your income, your living expenses, and then your debt as a separate entity. So part of that budget is to make sure that there is sufficient funds to make sure that you can still pay your normal monthly bills. So this would be your rent, your school fees, your fuel, whatever it is that your food, obviously, anything that you still need to survive every month. That remains in your discretion as to how you spend that and the expenses that you incur. The debt counsellor takes care of the debt side of things, and they negotiate with your credit providers and so forth.
And I suppose that the point of this is to get yourself out of the debt. It's then not once you've paid off all the debt to get yourself into further trouble as well. I think a lot of people, Annaline, think that once you're in debt rescue, you've actually been blacklisted. But that's actually the opposite of what's true.
Absolutely. So the whole purpose of debt counselling, as you've said, is to repay the debt that you have. And you cannot, continue incurring debt if you're struggling to pay the debt that you have. However, understanding that this is not a blacklisting at all. This is a temporary process that you go through to renegotiate with your credit providers, repay your debt at lower installments at a longer period of time, making sure that you can continue to still cover your living expenses. Because the biggest problem that consumers who are over indebted have is that, the juggling act they have with trying to decide, am I paying my debt or am I covering my living expenses? And more often than not, they might be paying their debt, but because they're not covering their living expenses, they're incurring further debt to cover their living expenses. And it just becomes a spiral. So quite the contrary, the whole purpose is it's a very, very clear and structured plan on how you are repaying the debt that you've incurred so far and preventing legal action in the process and, keeping your assets and so forth.
It's actually a way of keeping you out of being blacklisted. That's actually the point. As always, by the time you're blacklisted, it's far too late. It's a much harder process. Explain to some of us who might be curious to know, if once you're in a, let's call it a debt rescue process, I think the word process is correct on this. Annaline, this might be my last question due to time. What people are then not able to incur more debt. But what happens if someone does want to get their finances under control, but they've got, for example, a house they can't afford, they want to sell that, a car they can't afford, they want to sell that in order to pull down the amount of money they're spending? Does a debt rescue lock them out of those processes completely? Or what would someone do in a case like that?
Well, obviously, each set of circumstances are unique. But I mean, by all means, if you're in a position where, for example, you decide that you would like to sell your asset, for example, your home, because there's equity in it, and you know that money can rather be used to pay off the debt, and you for now are not you no longer want to own that property. That's most definitely something you can do. So you are not locked in the exact position where you are right now. And the other thing is also that, so for example, your financial circumstances change. You might be working overtime and getting extra income, or you get a bonus at your work, or you've won the lottery or something. You can apply those those extra funds towards your debt as well. So then the amount does not remain fixed, and you cannot pay more. By all means, we strongly encourage, if, for example, you have a bit of extra savings that you've managed to put together through some means, and you want to settle some of your accounts, it's very strongly encouraged because it gets you through the process faster.
Absolutely. And I think if anybody has won the lottery, please feel free to contact Annaline or myself. We'd like to be friends for the year ahead. Annaline, thank you very much. Indeed. Annaline van der Poel from Debt Rescue. Go and take a look at their website if you need help. And I think if I had time, I would have asked Annaline this. Don't wait until you're in the black. Don't wait until you're in the red. Just perhaps have a word with them. You can perhaps make your life much, much easier for the year ahead. All you got to do, I think, is just send an email, and they'll do the rest and see where you stand. It might be worth your trouble. All right.